get a chance. We're ready?
It's just in some of the students staying within your class.
She's gonna be awesome. That's what I think she's.
Oh, yeah.
It is?
Oh, yeah. Arm going up.
Oh, I can use that. But I've only like actually tried to review it like once or twice.
Yeah.
The kitty should be somewhere.
The wetland with an on top of it.
Yeah, I've been able to.
Yeah. May not be home.
There's a telephone.
Another.
Yeah, yeah, they're all following you.
Katie was like.
Oh, it's one story, that's what's
I'll text her. Oh, really?
It's like me.
Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Sir, take a moment. Are they ready? Dina, you ready?
I think so.
Are you ready? Yes, ma'am. Oh, we're ready.
Wonderful. And I just want to note that we are back on the record. And it is 8:49 PM. And just looking over at the court reporter, are you ready to roll too? Thank you. All right. So good evening, everybody. And fellow board members, I know we had to do a little quick change here. And we were in the midst of discussing the department's proposal and some of the elements of what we heard over the last few days, testimony and some of the record that was submitted, the evidence on the record. And I'm just looking at the board and seeing if anybody wanted to continue to jump in. I know I just want to note too that our court reporter said he had a hard stop at 10 PM. And actually, I want clarification of that. Is that something that both the boards, we need to finish up before?
Yes.
Okay, just want to double check that understanding. All right. So fellow board members, I don't know if you want to continue our discussion about the department's proposal. Get where we left off. Yes, Member Garcia?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I think I was about to say, I have to put my head back into this, that we heard a lot of great testimony. I learned a lot from the witnesses, and I appreciate all the information they gave us. I do note that there was a bit of misinformation as well, as always happens when there's complicated regulations. And my understanding is nobody is going to be made to do anything. Nobody's going to be made to buy an EV. Of course, the manufacturers are made to do something under this rule. They're having to deliver a certain percentage depending on the year, et cetera. But folks are not going to be made to buy EVs or PHEVs. And what, caught my attention was that this rule will impact the market and it will impact the dealerships, and they're going to have to juggle with the manufacturers, and it could impact the availability of the ICE vehicles. I understand all that. I'm thinking if we're moving towards electric vehicles, all this is going to happen eventually anyway. There's going to have to be some adjustments with the relationship with the dealers and the manufacturers at some point anyway. So with that, I'm willing to go to proceed with a motion, or I don't want to cut off any discussion. I just am ready to make a motion unless anybody wants to stop me.
Thank you, Member Garcia. I think we're ready for a motion. I see thumbs up by Member Bitzer and thumbs up by Vice Chair and Member Ely. So yes, Member Garcia.
Okay, thank you. I'll take a stab at it and our council can correct me if I'm not doing this correctly. So I move that our board adopt the proposal by the Environment Department. And I'm looking at the clean copy of the amendments to Title 20, Chapter 2, Part 91. Advanced Clean Cars 2. And based on the evidence presented in the hearing, throughout the hearing, based on the evidence presented by the Environment Department and others, and that the proposed rule appears to be technically has technical practicability, economic reasonableness, and is in the public interest. And I think that's it. Did I cover everything? Okay.
Yes, thank you. We have a motion on the floor by Member Garcia and looking around to see if there's a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Member Ely. And I just want to note that we have the motion and a second. And is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing nobody with any further discussion, I'll move to Ms. Jones. Would you mind doing a roll call vote on Member Garcia's motion and Member Ely's second?
Yes. Roll call on the motion. Member Bitzer, how do you vote?
I'll vote no.
Member Ely?
Yes. Yes.
Member Garcia?
Yes.
Vice Chair Trujillo?
No.
Chair Sweeney?
Yes.
You have 3 votes in the affirmative and 2 negative.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, and double check with legal counsel. Is that an approval of the motion? Thank you. With that, I know I have, is there any other comments or questions by the board? Yes, Member Ely?
I haven't had an opportunity to think of all these, so much work into this and came forward. I learned a lot during this hearing, and I just want to appreciate everybody and their hard work in making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Ely. And I also want to echo that sentiment, and I want to thank everybody who's sat with us over the last week. And with that, I want to state that the board's decision will be issued in writing and will include its reasons for the action taken. The board administrator shall provide notice of the board's action to each of the participants in the hearing and to all other persons who have made a written request to the board for notification of the action taken. And I think that's all for the EIB at this point. I believe I turn it back over to the Albuquerque AQ.
Point of information. Do
Yes.
we have a hearing tomorrow?
Yes.
It was on my calendar, but I thought, no, it must be a mistake because we're doing this.
No, we do.
It's, okay.
Thank you, Member Bitzer.
Well, usually I'd start with beginning the meeting at a time, but I suppose we've got all that, so court reporter's going. But we do still need to call the roll. So Ms. Estiarmijo, would you please call the roll?
Member Armijo?
Member Kalman. Here. Member Everline.
Here.
Member Galuski.
Here.
Member Lewis.
Here.
Vice Chair Richards.
Here.
Chair Paul.
Present. Okay, so we have a quorum. We're all present. Before we get into deliberations and everything, I thought Ms. Cedillo-Lopez would maybe remind us of all the elements that we must consider in this discussion and deliberation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under the board rule 20.11.82.32, it cites, has provided in the act in New Mexico statutes annotated 74-2-5E, in making its regulations, the board shall give weight it deems appropriate to all facts and circumstances, including the character and degree of injury or to interference with health, welfare, visibility, and property. The public, and number two, the public interest, including the social and economic value of the sources and subjects of air contaminants with due consideration for environmental justice principles. And three, technical practicability and economic reasonableness of reducing or eliminating air contaminants from the sources involved and previous experience with equipment and methods available to control the air contaminants involved. Under state law 74-2-5G, the board may adopt a regulation, a rule that is more stringent than federal law, federal act or federal regulations, or that applies to sources not subject to regulations pursuant to the federal act or regulations, based on a substantial ... based on substantial evidence and after notice and public hearing, both of which has occurred. I mean, the notice and public hearing have both occurred. That the proposed rule will be protective of public health and the environment. So those are the things the board needs to consider what I first mentioned, and it needs to make a specific finding that the proposed rule will be more protective of public health and the environment if you adopt this rule, because it is more stringent than federal law.
Thank you for that. I've also had a request from a couple of board members, if you would just refresh everyone how what are our capabilities here? As I understand it, we can do whatever we want. We don't have to follow EIB as an independent board, but what is the effect of not having the same rule as EIB? Is that, in my understanding, is that neither rule would stand.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. If this board does not also adopt what the EIB adopted, then neither rule will stand, because federal law, the Clean Air Act, requires that the entire state adopt the California Advanced Clean Cars. And if the entire state does not, then it regresses to the federal, not regresses, it shifts to the federal regulation that will be adopted.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cedillo-Lopez. So I will open the floor up for discussion now. If any board members would like to make comment or deliver a question from Vice Chair Richards.
I want to make sure I'm interpreting. Oh, sorry. I want to make sure I'm interpreting the reference you just made to character and degree of injury and interference with health, welfare, visibility, and property, that whole string. To what extent, this seems to be primarily around environment and public health, as you kind of reinforced in your last statement. To what extent can economic impact be made based on the testimony provided by the dealers?
That is under subsection 2, the public interest, including the social and economic value of the sources and subjects of air contaminants. These, I guess the sources and subjects, the subjects would be the air contaminants that are released by in the pipeline, in the what do you call it, tailpipe, pipeline, in the tailpipe, and the sources would be the vehicles So it does, like most agencies, you're charged with trying to find the balance.
Sorry, I think what I'm getting at is when you say that, it sounds like the decision is around not necessarily economic impact financially, but more around the public interest in terms of sources of air contaminants. Is that correct?
I believe that economic reasonableness, or the public, and you also have to look at number 3, technical practicability and economic reasonableness. So I think that the public interest has defined here would include economic value and economic reasonableness. So that is something that, that you do consider.
Because the rest of that sentence says economic reasonableness of reducing or eliminating air contaminants from sources. So to me, that seems to be more about, again, the source of contaminant.
I agree that two, you could read 2 that way, but then you also have 3, technical practicability and economic reasonableness of reducing or eliminating air contaminants from the sources involved. So, I believe that that's, and you also saw some economic analysis by the state as well. You saw it by all the parties, and it is something that you are to consider.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick procedural question?
Yes, after Member Lewis, who had one.
Oh,
And I would ask the council also give us a summary of the implications. I mean, the Environmental Improvement Board has passed the rule as stated. Does that mean that that is the only option that we have as well? I'm just looking here at process and how that works. So they've already voted. If we would vote and pass it with some amendment, there were 2 dates, for example, for N that were on the table at one point. It sounded like we had some flexibility in terms of the date of implementation. If we would take advantage of either of those options, what does that do? Because then we have 2 different rules.
That 2 different rules would not satisfy the federal requirement.
And they can't vote again, so that would kill the whole.
Well, I don't know whether they could go vote again. That would be up to them. It's something over which we would have no control, whether your board would have no control.
Okay, I just needed clarification on that. Thank you.
Member Kalman.
My question was directly related to that, which is why I was almost interrupting. I'm sorry. I had that same question, but just to take it a little bit further, if we did want to only consider the 2032 rule because that's what the EIB just did, would we have to take a motion the way they did to remove the 2035 option? Or is it just understood that we're considering 2032?
I don't think that a motion is necessary. I think they did it for absolute clarity. And it is very clear that they did not, that they didn't feel the need to debate part of it. And they also all agreed not to extend it as was requested by climate advocates. And so they just wanted that very clear on the record. But I think if you just have a motion to adopt it, that's also clear.
Does that answer your question? Great. Despite what feels like I suppose not being pigeonholed, but limited options, I think it's important that we still discuss the rule and make our own decision as an independent board. And because we have the power to, not enforce the rule, which would mean it's not enforced statewide, or not take up the rule. So would anyone like to discuss any of the testimony that they saw today or any conclusions they have, or make a motion? But I'd rather hear a little discussion first. Mr. Armijo.
You start on this end, I guess. I am not a big aspect of kicking the can or kicking the can down the road. And I think if we don't do something now, who knows what's going to happen in the future? I know, and we've heard from a lot of dealers that say they're going to be adversely impacted by this. But change is hard. Anytime there's change, there's adverse reactions, adverse things happen. So I firmly believe in my heart that we should go in and implement the thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amijo. Member Amijo. Vice Chair Richards.
I have to say, when I was listening to the testimony by the dealers, I felt that there were a lot of important issues raised, and actually I was concerned about those issues. The way I'm reading the law, and I know Ms. Cedillo Lopez, you provided us with your interpretation, it seems like this is somewhat restricted in really looking at public health as well as injury from air pollutants, from potential air pollutants, and the environment. So really two main things, public health and the environment. I believe this rule would reduce some of the public health concerns that had been expressed by the emergency room doctors. I'm a little, I have to say, the public health analysis in terms of dollar values to lives saved, premature mortality, I felt was so far ranging that it really lacked to inspire confidence in me in those numbers. But I do believe just as one tool in reducing ozone that could be useful for this state and particularly for this county, which is at 95%, that it provides, again, one mechanism to decrease ozone and decrease air pollution and improve public health benefits. However, I also understand that people can go anywhere to buy cars. So I don't think it's necessarily everything that it was purported to be in the testimony provided by climate advocates. So I think there's more work that needs to be done. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Vice Chair Richards. Member Lewis.
Thank you. I guess I share a lot of the issues that Vice Chair Richards raised. I think, there is the issue of an argument to be made for having infrastructure in place, for having incentives in place. And I think those arguments ring very true. However, as I said in the hearings, we have dysfunctional systems here, but the climate impacts really don't care, and they're going to move ahead no matter what. And because of that, I wish there were other things that we could do to structure this differently, but that's not an option that we have. And because we can't do those options, like starting it in a different route or changing start dates and still having an effective rule, I lean towards approval of it as it stands. And it is because of the constraints. Otherwise, I think I would make it a different rule.
Member Gluski, thank you. Member Lewis.
Thank you. Yeah, so I want to thank everyone for the testimony this week. It's been fascinating and actually surprisingly enjoyable. I've learned a lot and it's caused me to think really deeply about the issues. And as I thought about this, listening to the testimony, I see the issues in three different categories. First, there are immutable laws of physics. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Ozone damages the human lungs. PM 2.5 is dangerous. We can't do anything about that. Believe me, if I could pass a regulation that would make CO2 no longer a greenhouse gas, I would happily do that. So, and I've been glad to see that we are in agreement about those physical realities. There's another very broad set of issues involving the engineering challenges associated with adopting this regulation, things like battery life, different battery technologies, rolling out charging stations, making sure the infrastructure is in place, what kinds of different hybrid vehicles there might be, different technologies. Those are issues about which I'm very optimistic. I think that especially here in New Mexico, we have a long history with our national labs of tackling very difficult problems. And I think these are tractable problems that we can overcome. The third set of challenges are around what I would call human systems. This is the things like the relationship between the car manufacturers and the dealers, government incentives to buy electric vehicles, outreach activities. And those are unfortunately sometimes quite challenging. I think if this regulation passes, I don't think people will intentionally shoot themselves in the foot. I think people will make smart decisions. And if it passes, I very much hope that the state legislature does what it can to support its success. We have about 5 years of a carbon budget globally to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that is generally agreed as something we would like to avoid, 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And we have maybe 20 years of carbon budget to avoid the 2 degrees of warming threshold. So we have to act. We cannot keep kicking this down the road. There are some daunting challenges with adopting this. The differences between California and New Mexico are stark. I lived in California for many years and love it. But of course, there is much greater uptake already of zero emission vehicles in California than here in New Mexico. It is a challenging landscape, but I think we need to take on challenging opportunities. Our country, I think, has taken on a bit of a tone of failure exceptionalism where we look at difficult problems and throw our hands up and say, oh, it's too hard, we can't do it. And this is a very consequential decision, but I do support adopting this plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Galuski, also for your professorial hat there. Appreciated it. Member Calvin, would you like to speak? Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody's comments. I don't know how I could follow Member Galuski after that. That was very articulate and said most of what I wish I could say that articulately. And I don't want to be too repetitive. It was a really interesting hearing. I also actually thought it was enjoyable. I was left feeling with some concerns about the practical rollout of this rule. And I say that as a proud EV owner who is also well aware of the challenges of charging and range and all the rest of it. And I think that this rule's success will depend on real commitment by the state, both at the legislature level and whatever administration is here now and later, to make sure that all of those incentives and rollouts make this rule successful and workable. So I know that there are some bumps in this road, but I don't think that that means the road is not worth taking. This is an emergency and I view it as an emergency. And so I echo everybody's support of the rule. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Calvin. And Member Eberline?
Yes, I will also thank everybody for coming here and educating us over this long week. I would look at these rules that I've always been looking at them as there are 3 different rules that we are actually passing in one or trying to pass in one batch, and I've always thought, okay, well, the omnibus one about the NOx and stuff like that, that's nobody's opposed that one. And I think it'll have a great effect. I live relatively close to, and my grandkids live close to the Interstate 40 with all the trucks coming into town. And it's really, I think the effect of that one will have a great effect on the air quality and when it comes to ozone in the things. The same thing with the clean trucks part, the ones I've always been skeptical a little bit about. So I think the 2 first one will have great and positive impacts, while the advanced car 2 will, clean car 2 will have more marginal effect But as you're gonna do them as a whole, I'm in favor of passing them all because that's the option we have. We should not kick the can down the road, as Mr. Armayor says. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Eberline. Yeah, Member Lewis.
Yeah, I also just want to, and I also echo the thank yous, and sorry I didn't put those out there before. I think all the issues that were raised were very much important issues to hear and to consider in this. And I remain concerned about the delivery issues and the supply issues. And I just want to go on record saying that I think it's going to be a very major responsibility for both MAD and EHD to work very hard on promoting the benefits of this and to be promoting the purchase of these vehicles and why, to help and not leave the whole burden on dealers to try and promote the sale and the uptake of the vehicles.
Thank you, Member Lewis. Member Armijo.
I have one more comment, and nobody discussed this, and I think we need to figure out if we want to implement the starting or the end date is the 2032 and not the 2035. And I don't know how we can do that by straw vote or whatever, but that's something I think we need to talk about.
Please, does anyone have any comments about the difference between 2032 and 2035? Am I representing what you said?
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
My understanding is the issue about the date is it's about the percentages, that it's 82% in 2032 and then 100% in 2035, which is the California rule. I support leaving it at the 2032 level. So there's that 20% of ICE vehicles that continues. And then if we exceed expectations, then this can be revisited, it sounds like. And it doesn't require language tonight for that to be revisited in a few years. Is that correct? I see our attorney nodding.
That's correct.
Okay. So that's my opinion.
I agree.
Any other thoughts on the 2032 versus 2035? Hearing none. Yeah, I'll just say real quick, thank you, board, for saying for saying a lot and thinking a lot and working hard on this and listening. I just want to echo that I heard a lot more to be concerned about than I expected to coming into this hearing, especially for the impacts of rural New Mexicans and disadvantaged New Mexicans, whether that's low income or elderly or young folks or the Navajo Nation. And that, if we pass this rule, I think that it's in everyone in the state, especially our agencies and our, really everyone, I'm not calling out anyone in particular, but I think that folks, we need to make sure that this rule does not, that the burden, as the dealers have mentioned, and their customers are not, that we don't continue to put burden on those that are the most disadvantaged. And so whether that's funneling more money to charging stations in the right places, starting businesses that work on the specific impacts of this kind of thing, I think that's very serious. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that we heard that. Hearing a lot of agreement, I would ask that a member make a motion. If they make a motion to move forward, it would be a motion where you move that the board finds that the regulation is more protective of public health and the environment, and you adopt it as presented by the EHD. That's the language.
You might have to coach me with the language. I move that the proposed regulation, tell me what the,
That the board finds
The board finds that this regulation
Is more protective of public health.
is more protective of public health
In the environment.
and the environment, and that we adopt
The regulation of
the regulation as proposed by EHD. Yes.
I'll second that, so I don't have to say it.
Okay, is there, so it's proposed by member Galuski and seconded by member Kalman. Is there any discussion, any further discussion by board members? Ms. Esther Mijo, if you would please call the roll.
Member Armijo,
Yes.
Member Kalman,
Yes.
Member Everline,
Yes.
Member Galuski,
Yes.
Member Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Chair Paul.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for your time. We have a couple things to do. First, Ms. Esther Mijo and Ms. Sona and council, we make sure that the appropriate documentation of this vote and the reasons for this vote are prepared for my signature and timely transmission to the state records office. Just an affirmative from everyone. Yes, please.
I don't know if that's actually plugged in. I'll just talk very loud. Oh, okay. Not our normal setup. Yes, so EHD did file a proposed final order with our filings that should be in the docket. And as needed, I'm happy to assist Ms. Esther Mijo and your council with the transmittal forms.
Thank you, Ms. Sena. Just looking for a yes from the three people that I pointed out. Ms. Esther Mijo.
Sorry, not sure what the language is needed right now, but
I'm just asking,
Yes.
yeah, if you can make sure it gets to the records office in time and accurately. Thank you. And council.
Of course, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Parties, public commenters, EIB, our staff, the court reporter, EIB staff. I won't keep anyone here longer than they need to be. It's a late night. Thank you, and everyone have a good night.